It's OPB Politics Now for Friday, August 16th. Portlanders have known for almost 2 years now that big changes are coming. Not only did voters completely change the structure of city governance in 2022, they also approved an entirely new system for electing city leaders. We have talked a lot about this on the podcast, but it turns out there is so much more. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the city's civic facelift and how it's going to radically alter how things work in the Portland City Hall you might think you know. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics reporter Dirk VanderHart.
And I'm OPB City Government reporter Alex Zielinski.
Alex, I just want to start off by admitting something. I consider myself fairly well-versed in Portland city government. I covered City Hall for a number of years, and I felt like, until recently at least, I really had a pretty good grasp of these huge changes that are about to kick in at the beginning of next year. And then I read this very thorough story you wrote recently on those changes and realized that a lot more was at play than I'd realized. This is just going to be a fundamentally really different city hall in a whole lot of interesting ways come January.
Yeah. I mean, first, thank you for reading my story.
You're welcome.
Second, you're right. This will look a lot different than the city hall that you and I have become intimately familiar with over the years. Everything from how proposals are brought to council for a vote to how everyday Portlanders can weigh in on them is set to change. And it's a serious makeover, and it's all falling into place very quickly.
Yeah, and so what I thought we would do today is just walk people through that a bit more with the understanding that even though there is less than 4 months until these changes take effect, some of this is still up in the air. But let's first just start with the sort of basics that people probably, Politics Now listeners, are probably most familiar with. Voters in 2022 approved 3 big changes to the way the city of Portland is going to work.
Yeah, and I'll try to make it as straightforward as possible for now. So like you said, 3 things. First, Portland City Council will change. It's going to grow from 5 to 12 members, with the mayor no longer sitting on council. And city council members will now be elected to represent geographic districts instead of the entire city. Second, city council members will no longer oversee city departments, as they have for the past 100 years. They will only focus on policymaking. And a new city administrator will be in charge of city bureaus. And then the last thing, Portland will elect officials using a new process called ranked choice voting, which I imagine I'll get into a bit more later.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, look, any one of those on their own would have been huge. And then taken together, I feel like it's almost hard to find a word to capture it, like chaos. I don't know. But let's just start with this big notion of shifting away from the commission form of government, which you said we've been under for 100 years. Remind us what it means. Yeah.
So I think it's easiest to explain by reminding folks how the city has been run up until now, because a lot of folks aren't totally aware.
Right.
So, like I said, for more than 100 years, Portland commissioners have acted as city bureau administrators as well as legislators, meaning that they shape and vote on policies, but also oversee operations of major city departments like water or parks or police. In the past, that has led to bureaus being used a bit like political pawns with council members, like, using their policies to make political statements or undermining other bureaus' budgets to save their own. In this old format, council members were also elected to represent the entire city, not geographic districts. So under this new change, which is called a mayor-council form of government, city council members will no longer oversee bureaus. They will only be making policies and representing their districts. Instead, the city will hire a brand new city administrator to oversee all of these bureaus in hopes of removing politics from basic city operations.
Huge foundational change to the way the politics of the building are going to work. I mean, just so much there. And then with this new model of a council that is more about passing policies than running bureaus, we are also about to get a vastly expanded city council.
Right. It'll be about triple the size it is now. 12 councilors total, with 3 each representing one of the 4 new districts. And just to make it extra bonkers, all of these seats, and the mayor and the auditor seat, are up for grabs this November. In the future, there will be 6 seats open every 2 years. But since this is all brand new, we have this clean slate, we have to elect everyone for every single seat to start fresh.
And then, of course, on top of just creating 7 brand new elected official positions, no big deal, Portlanders then agreed to adopt an entirely new, I think for many people, kind of confusing system for how to vote for them. And this is maybe the hardest part of all this to explain, but walk us through it a little bit.
Yeah, you're right. This is hands down the most difficult thing to explain, especially without visuals.
Right.
So let's see how I do. So again, let's look at how things have run up until now. So previously, Portlanders voting in a city election would get their ballot and just fill in a bubble for a single candidate per office. And come primary election day, if a candidate collects more than 50% of all votes, they automatically win. If no one does, the top 2 scorers head off to a runoff election and the top vote getter wins. Pretty simple. So now we're going to be ranking our candidates in order from most to least favorite. It's a spectrum. The whole idea is to increase the chance of voters electing someone they support, even if the winning candidate is not their number one pick. On election day, staff initially will just tally what people's top vote was, what that number one pick was. And how votes are calculated is a little bit different between the mayor and council races. So first I'll start with the mayor's race.
Okay.
So in the mayor's race, if someone gets more than 50% of the vote, they win. If no one gets that many votes in the first count, the candidate with the least number of votes is eliminated. Voters who chose that losing candidate as their top pick get their votes transferred to the candidate who is their second choice, and staff recalculate the results. If that doesn't push a candidate over 50%, the cycle continues until someone crosses that threshold.
Right.
The council race is a bit different because they're electing 3 council members to represent this district, all on the same ballot, instead of just one person. But the process is essentially the same, with staff going through to eliminate candidates until 3 pass this vote threshold. The only difference is that the threshold is lower. Candidates only have to get over 25% of the vote to win. I think that's it. If I lost anyone, there's a very adorable video with puppets depicting this process that I linked to in my story. I recommend you check it out.
Yeah, it's so counterintuitive in some ways, this specifically the council piece, because we're electing 3 people per district, so you only need 25% plus 1 to secure. I mean,
isn't that much?
It's unlike any way I'm used to thinking of elections.
Right.
It is a little bit mind-bending. And, you know, let's just note here, too, that this voting system is going to come with its very own ballots. So Portlanders are going to be receiving 2 ballots this fall instead of 1. One for these city races that includes this very unique sort of formatting for ranked choice voting, and then one for the county, state, and federal races also up for consideration. It is going to be fascinating, maybe a little bit nerve-wracking, maybe a little bit maddening, I think, to watch that voting tabulation process play out for ranked choice. And as you noted in your story, Alex, it also might be slower than voters are used to.
Yeah, you know, this is much a new experiment for us voters as it is for the city and county's elections office. So they're being really cautious about their tabulation process. As you know, we usually get a few updates on ballot counts on election night, starting at 8 p.m. and going up until midnight sometimes.
Yep.
This November, the public will only get one update on election night. We won't learn about how ballots tallied later in the night factor in until about 24 hours later. So it's very likely we won't have any idea who's ahead in a race by the end of election day, because even if someone appears to be leading in the first round, in subsequent rounds, other votes may be distributed to other candidates and push them past that threshold. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, and we know that Multnomah County elections officials are working really hard to be prepared for this, and you know, similar things play out around the country. But man, it is gonna this first run is gonna be it's gonna be a doozy. Okay, so that in my mind covers the basics, right? The things that I was pretty sure I understood about how this all would work. It's where the rubber kind of meets the road on all this that I found myself really interested and surprised when I read in your story exactly what is going to happen. Because, you know, what I don't think I realized is all the ways that Portland's new city government would start to look like a baby version of the state legislature in some ways, which is how I think of it as someone who covers state politics. I want to start with the role of the mayor. So, you know, right now I think being Portland mayor is often seen as somewhat of a weak role compared to mayors in other cities. You know, you can propose a budget. You get this pretty powerful job of assigning city bureaus to city commissioners, which can, you know, you can really make your political foes' life hell through that if you want to. But your vote counts on city council the same as anyone else's. You know, you can't veto any ordinances that pass. And then in reading your recent story, I found myself kind of wondering if this is a more powerful role that we are creating for the mayor or a less powerful role. It feels like it's in this no man. I don't really know how to think about it. So just help us understand how this role would work.
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily say that the mayor is much stronger under this new system. I don't know if they're weaker, but like you said, it's a bit of a gray area. Like I said earlier, the mayor will no longer have a vote on city council. They won't have veto power either. They will be able to submit policy ideas to what's voted on by the council, and they will still be responsible for writing the city budget. They can also break a tie if the council is stuck in a 6-6 vote. Oh, and they can also hire and fire the police chief, city administrator, and city attorney. But that's kind of it. City staff who are laying the groundwork for this switch kind of compared the role to a CEO of a company, where a company's board makes policy decisions, like a council, and a CEO is responsible for putting them into action. But frankly, I kind of push back on that metaphor a little bit, since it's more the role of this new city administrator to oversee these changes at the department level. The mayor is going to allegedly be responsible for making sure the administrator does that job, but the mayor will also have limited authority to intervene. It seems like that position will really just be pretty symbolic, a figurehead of sorts. I think it'll really depend on what the person elected to that seat chooses to do with it.
I had that exact same reaction because I started thinking, okay, maybe the mayor in my state government framing is like the governor, right? Who, the legislature is enacting bills, the governor needs to put them into play. But you're right, there is this crucial difference. The mayor is hiring the administrator that's really going to put all this stuff into action. And so he's just, it's almost a redundancy in some ways of the way the CEO or the governor model works. And I just think it will be fascinating to understand how that actually plays out. And then complicating things even more here, right? There are other pretty powerful people that will be in the building. Specifically, there's another position in this form of government that appears like it's going to have maybe more power than the mayor.
Yeah.
Help us understand the council president role.
Yeah, so that's the council president, which is a pretty new concept to Portland. To be clear, we have someone called a council president right now, but it's a purely ceremonial role. It's just a rotating council member who steps in to read agenda items when the mayor is absent from a council meeting, and that's about it. So this new council president will be in charge of what gets on the council agenda. Council members and bureau leadership will bring their policy proposals to the council president, and it will be up to them to decide if they even reach a council discussion on it. The new city council will have to vote on who the council president is first thing January, and like you said, it's a very powerful role.
Yeah, I mean, that role alone, like I have an ordinance I'd like to bring forward. Can I have your permission, council president, to do that? That could be hugely...
They can say no.
We've seen some of that dynamic actually in Multnomah County, and
right.
That has created a lot of, I think, controversy there. But then there's this other thing I really found fascinating in your story, which is, it might not even be the mayor who is sort of the spokesperson of city policy. It might be that this new council president who runs the body that's actually passing this policy is the person speaking to the public about the motivations or whatnot. I mean, I don't know. How are you thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, that's how it's been framed so far, that the council president will be responsible for representing policy decisions and votes that come to council, speaking at press conferences, speaking just publicly about kind of what's going on. At the same time, the mayor is expected to be this kind of spokesperson for bigger picture city announcements and decisions, which will make this a bit complicated. There's a very real potential that the council president and the mayor will not get along and not agree on who gets to talk about what thing, or maybe they'll get along just fine. I mean, I don't know. Like you said earlier, it's just chaos.
And it makes me wonder, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit the other day, like we are going to have a very heated race for mayor. And do the folks like Carmen Rubio, Renee Gonzalez, all the other folks running for mayor actually know the role that they are going to, I mean, it is almost undefined in some ways at this point. It will be very, very interesting.
And at the same time, there are folks running for council who have explicitly said that they're interested in being council president.
Right.
And that they're angling to get support and not be combative on the campaign trail to get the votes from maybe other candidates as soon as they're elected to lead the council. So it's a whole nother kind of dynamic in this race.
Yeah, it's a shadow race. Okay, we can talk about that later. Let's also, though, talk about some of the big changes to the way the city council actually will interact with the public. This is another thing that I found very, very interesting in your story. Because, anyone who has followed Portland City Hall is used to the dynamic of citizens, some of them every week, some of them in various levels of peak, showing up to weekly city council meetings to support or oppose the ordinances that are on the table, or sometimes they just want to talk about the same thing every week. That is their personal sort of crusade or bugaboo. Under the new system, though, we are not going to have folks directly speaking to the whole council sitting there on the dais. We're going to have a situation that's much more, again, I have to say, like the state legislature, where committees are doing a lot of this nitty-gritty work.
Right, and that's a very useful comparison in this situation. So like at the state level, the city is going to have a number of committees that focus on different policy areas like housing, public safety, transportation, that kind of stuff. There will be about 7 or so council members on each committee. And it's at these meetings that policy ideas and proposals will come up for the first time. It's where we'll see the majority of public feedback and councilors debating on topics. And if a committee votes to approve a policy, that's when it will head to the full 12-person council for the final vote, just like the Senate or the House floor. One thing to note, we don't really know how many committees there will be yet or how frequently they will meet. That will be up to the new council to decide.
And something we were talking about yesterday is there is this, for anyone who covers or watches City Hall, I mean, there is this long tradition of people showing up every week. Like I said, some of them bring their same argument or the grudge that they are holding against a specific council member or whatever. But this kind of big tradition of City Hall, people come in and yell and have their say. And this is just this remove from the entire city council, I think, is a big change there. And it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out.
They're going to have to kind of pick their battles a bit more, I think.
We have been so deep in the nitty-gritty here. I want to just ask the big question that I have, probably not one that you or I can actually answer with any accuracy. But, Portlanders finally ditched the commission form of government in 2022 because I think of a sense that the government was really, really not working here for a variety of concerning reasons, right? And even if this new way of doing things fixes some of those problems, it is hard to see in my mind. And maybe I should ask you, aren't chaos and the growing pains of figuring out how to drive this new bus likely to distract rather than sort of amplify our means of fixing these problems? Aren't we really just going to be figuring out how the heck these new dynamics work as opposed to training, our attention on some of these really big intractable issues?
Yeah. I mean, knowing how this plane is going to land is anyone's guess at this point. But there's a real anxiety that it could just make things messier and overly complicated and more expensive, especially for this brand new elected body. A lot of them have no experience in government, let alone this new government. And I think it's fair to say that the first half of next year is going to be pretty unprecedented. There's going to be kinks in the system that the city will discover and have to fix. There'll be processes that some council members are just going to hate and will try to change. There's probably going to be a lot of public frustration with how much time it will take to get everyone up to speed. What's kind of fun about it to me is that we're all kind of buckled in for the same ride. We're approaching this top of this roller coaster right now, and come November, we're all going to be plummeting into the unknowns together. But there are largely unknowns that we all, as a city, voted to take a chance on. It's going to happen. It's going to be messy. Someone might throw up or lose their hat. I don't know. I'm really wearing out this metaphor right now, but there's something kind of thrilling to all of this to me as someone who covers this, and it seems like the same thing day in or day out. To your point, at the end of the day, Portlanders are still going to be complaining about government dysfunction by the end of next year, and 10 years from now, there will always be something that needs fixing. Bureaucracy is imperfect, but why not have something new to complain about?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm fascinated by it. I can't wait to see what happens. But as a person that cares about the civic health of the city we're sitting in, I'm also just curious whether or not it's going to make anything better. Yeah. And on that very happy note, let's wrap it up. I mean, I think there's a lot more we could say. I think there's a lot more we're going to say, but we have to call it somewhere. Alex, thanks so much for walking us through it today.
No problem.
This episode of OPB Politics Now was recorded in the Gert Boyle studio here at OPB. It was produced by Andrew Thien with audio engineering from Nalene Silva, and our music comes from Audio Network. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting, including Alex's very interesting explanation of the upcoming changes at City Hall at opb.org. While you're there, become an OPB member. You can also rate or review us in your podcast app of choice. And as of this month, you can find us on YouTube if that's how you like to listen. Don't worry, we don't have cameras filming this right now. It is just audio. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.